I really do think that a lot of the change that needs to come in people's hearts in this like crazy time is gonna have to come through relationship. And so, you know, I am very well aware of the fact that the vast majority of people who will ever see this video are people who are connected to me in some way through a personal relationship I have with them, or a personal relationship that someone I have a relationship with has with someone else. And so I am in no way vying for like top spot of like trending influencer or anything like that. Hence why, you know, there's no fancy editing and cool graphics and stuff like that. Maybe one day that'll come. In some of my other videos, I think maybe there's a little bit more fun, cool stuff going on. But with regards to like these like musings or whatever that I have, as I've mentioned already, you know, at this point in time, I feel like the Lord is just prompting me to just get on and say stuff that is on my heart, and be obedient like instantly and do it. And so that's what I'm doing. And so you know, whether or not it's refined and polished and all that stuff is kind of, like I said, irrelevant to me. I'm not doing it for the like clout or whatever, you know. I'm just trying to be obedient and trying to share, and then hopefully maybe prompting some discussion that will be helpful. Just as a side note, that said, you know, I do think that the likes and the comments and the smiley faces and the hearts and those sort of things, they're super helpful, just in terms of like the algorithm pushing the video forward to maybe other people who wouldn't already, you know, be in that group that I already mentioned that would naturally be inclined to see this video. But honestly, I'd ask, if you are going to put a comment in the comment section, let's actually like prompt some discussion. So if it's something that, you know, I said that you found helpful, or something that you want to have a discussion with the other people who happen to watch this video on, or maybe want me to do another video on something else, just leave that in the comments. Like I said, I love the encouragement, the thumbs up, the smiles, the happy faces, all that, but let's use this comment section to actually like prompt some discussion. So that said, I've got something that I'm going to read to you guys, and then I'll just kind of get rolling on the thoughts of the evening. So in Matthew 24, in verse 3, it's just talking about kind of like the signs of the coming of the end of the age, you know, the apocalypse or end of the world as we know it. And so verse 3, it says, "So now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?'" And of course, they're completely misled about what that actually means. They're thinking of like a new earthly kingdom in their lifetime that is not in any way, shape, or form what Christ was talking about. But in verse 4, it says, "And Jesus answered to them and said, 'Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I'm the Christ, and they'll deceive many.'" In verse 6, it says, "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see that you're not troubled, for these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." In verse 7, it says, "For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be famine, pestilence, earthquakes in various places, and these are the beginnings of sorrows." And then it talks about some things about like how they will be martyred and killed, which isn't super happy. So I'm trying to skip it, but I also don't want to like sugarcoat what's actually in the Bible. So it says that they'll deliver you up to tribulation, kill you, and you'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. So, honestly, there was a phrase in there, a few phrases in here, but you know, nation will not rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There'll be famines, pestilence, and earthquakes in various places in verse 7. And I think it wasn't until speaking with someone this evening that nation against nation really triggered something different in my mindset about this particular passage. You know, we always think about this as actual physical nations with boundaries and borders and diplomats and, you know, all sorts of like authorities that are governmental authorities. But one thing that we forget about is the fact that like people tend to define themselves within some sort of national origin. You know, a black person may decide that they are African American or Caribbean American or Haitian American or Afro Latina or you know, someone who is Caucasian may identify themselves as American and just straight up American, or maybe they say, hey, I've got Norwegian roots, or I'm German, or I'm Russian, or I'm whatever, you know, demographic you feel like you belong to. Or, you know, someone may say, hey, we're Asian, but then, no, I'm Japanese, no, I'm Korean, no, I'm like South Korean, you know, and so people start dividing themselves even within a nation as nations amongst ourselves. And so we're starting to see that. I was having a discussion this evening, and there was a story that was being recounted about a particular situation that occurred, I guess, in the last day or so, where an Asian American family, essentially trying to protect their business from looting, found, you know, there was this tragic incident that happened, and the son of this particular family was killed. Not super clear on the details. Looks like it may have possibly been an accidental like fratricide. However, what you know, the, I guess, prevailing thought process was in this particular group was that, you know, these black people are looting our businesses and destroying our property because they're mad at white people, and we are not involved and we didn't do anything, so we have to defend our people in our nation. And you know, I know anybody who knows the Chicagoland area and some of the tensions that are going on out there is also probably very well aware of the fact that like the Latin gangs had pretty much put out kind of like a, you know, bolo or whatever you want to call it for the black community, and particularly black gangs, because they had decided they were going to band together and protect their property and their things, you know. And then on the flip side, you come to Seattle or you come to, you know, Minneapolis, and you see that there are you know, maybe black looters and rioters and stuff like that, and maybe a handful of black arsons, but then you've also got these other bad actors, you know, that, you know, based on the live stream footages and stuff like that that I've seen, they're readily available, you know, Alpha News, you know, Andrew Mercado, Unicorn Riot, any of that stuff, any of that footage, you can see live who's out burning stuff down and stuff like that. And while it's a very mixed crowd, there are a lot of Caucasian people out and about in the streets doing this stuff too. And so, and maybe doing some of the more heavy lifting with regards to some of the destruction in some of these areas. Whereas, you know, in Atlanta, it was a primarily African American neighborhood where a situation occurred at the Wendy's. You know, you've got stuff going on there, and it's these fractions within the ethnic groups where everyone feels like they have to fend for themselves because nobody is gonna fend for them. You know, if someone feels like, hey, I'm a white male and I didn't have anything handed to me, I had to work hard for everything I got, why does somebody feel like they need to try to take some of the privilege that I feel I've earned from me, just because they feel like they haven't, you know, gotten there themselves. You know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you know. And then the black community says, hey, well, we are starting at a 400-year deficit from what you're starting from, and we're facing biases that you can't pinpoint and you can't easily prove are happening that are affecting our everyday life. But then you see someone who is Hispanic or Asian or Native American. Gosh, the Native American communities are sitting here saying, our whole land, you all are on our land that was taken from us and given scraps to us, and yet who is standing out fighting for us? Like, nobody's standing out fighting for us. And so these fractions are just continuing just to tear and tear and tear at the fabric of what should be a unified, United States of America. And that is very much not what we're seeing. We're seeing, people hanging from trees now, literally black men hanging from trees to prove a point. Yes, it is a point, and unfortunately it's being deemed as suicides. The and I'm not a biologist, I'm not a doctor or whatever like that, but I have spoken to people who have been involved in the work of, the suicide assistance and shift programs and those sort of things, and unfortunately the kind of recovery programs for those sort of issues and situations. And hanging yourself is a very difficult task, and it ends up being a very messy thing that doesn't look like it looks on movies, when you're trying to do it yourself. And so the probability of these men hanging themselves in a suicide is a very, very unlikely case. So now you've got tensions. I know of people who have who live out in California. I know one guy, was chatting with him, just very, very, very briefly yesterday, and he went out and he pulled down a noose that was hanging in his neighborhood because he was just so pissed. He saw that this thing was hanging in his neighborhood, and he went and pulled it down himself. And so this is what is happening. It's these tensions, these rifts in our nation that are coming up, and they're genuine. Like, I can genuinely see how a Hispanic American person could say, great, I don't care if you're mad about a black issue or whatever, when you've got my nation's babies locked in a jail cell somewhere because their parents tried to bring them through the border illegally or whatever. I can understand how that would frustrate someone, And so I think, again, we have to get away from this either or that is pervading our nation. It's this idea that you're for me or against me. My pastor, Peter Haas, in conjunction with my old pastor, Miles McPherson, and all the other pastors. I feel like Mike Todd's message, Mike Todd, I think it was Pastor Darius, that I think actually all the pastors this past week have been on it with regards to this unity and not having this big us versus them mentality, because that's not how people are not going to know Christians by the sides that we pick. We have to somehow do something that shows that we're different in how we view the situation, because it's not going to be solved by dividing. The Tower of Babel, if you remember in the Tower of Babel, when the Lord confused all the languages, he confused all the languages because he said that essentially when we are united, there wasn't going to be anything that we were going to put our minds to that we would be unable to do. And they were trying to build like a tower up to the sky to touch the Lord or something like that. And he just basically was like, I'm fed up with it, enough. Y'all all going to speak different languages because you don't need to be united. And technology and all that sort of thing, in theory, you would think that, oh wow, we're getting to this point where we can have this beautiful unity. And so on the one hand, we have unity to be able to create and concoct or whatever, but unfortunately we're unifying to create division. It's just getting out of hand. It's getting ridiculous. And even this idea of like having to be, and I say this almost cautiously, because I do think that we need to be very selective with the choices of things that we say and how we respond to people. But even this idea of being politically correct and being on the right side of a social issue, when in many cases what I've seen is just pandering and patronizing to certain groups of people. It's like, oh, okay, well, I feel like society wants me to say this about this group, and so I will get on board and I'll say this. I might not believe it, I might not say that behind closed doors in my home. I may not do anything to physically take action to help improve the plight of this community that I'm standing up here championing, but I want it to be known, before all of man, that I stand for one side or another, and people are demonized for standing on the opposite side of whatever the popular opinion is. You'll lose your job, you'll lose your house, you'll lose your livelihood, you'll lose your profession, which I guess is your job, but like all of these other things, you'll be ridiculed and you'll be plastered all across social media or whatever for something that you said that doesn't make popular opinion, and I think that starts to get really, really dangerous, because at what point do you cut that off and say, this is the line of what is offensive and what is not? When's the day going to come where, the cross at the top of my church down in Minneapolis is going to be offensive and someone's going to tear that down off the top of the building? God forbid. I pray protection over that building so that never happens, but I think on the one hand, you've got grace, truth, and you've got this sense of, we've got, I said in my last video, we are not a Christian nation. We should be. We're not. We've never been. We've been founded on Christian principles, which I think is what has helped us. But in all honesty, like, if we were following the Bible, like, there would be a lot of things that we would do differently. Jesus could have, to the point of one of the sermons that I referenced earlier, like, Jesus could have very well had the lady who was caught in the act of adultery in the middle of his sermon. He could have had her stoned because she was violating the law, and it was completely legal and completely within the realm of the customs of his culture to say she should be killed right now on the spot for what she has done. And he completely violated what was like culturally appropriate or culturally normal to do what is right. And so I think, unfortunately, a lot of times people get so hyped up on this, like, this is what my culture thinks, or this is what my tradition of my particular political affiliation believes is right, and it's like, okay, where did you get this idea? Is it scriptural? And is this something that you need to revisit? It's just a mess, I think, with how we are currently operating, and it's not, honestly, the way we're doing stuff, it's not going to lead to unity. Pulling down statues, there are people who, I went to a university that had statues of leaders who were part of the history and heritage of our nation and part of the history and heritage of my alma mater, because they went on and they did big things for the history of the era that they lived in. Were they potentially bad, imperfect people? Absolutely. Do I think that maybe their statues could be relocated to a museum or something that is more better suited for the actual things that they represented in their life? Yeah. But do I think that us going around and just deciding to rip down statues and things like that is the right answer? Maybe not, Although on the flip side, Jesus went into a temple and flipped over the tables. So, it might be the right answer. That's why I say you need to do your research and see, is this a biblical thing or not? There were statues that people didn't bow to, got thrown in the fire, wouldn't bow to them, So it's like, again, I'm not trying to tell you what you need to believe, but I'm saying that it needs to be based on something more than just your feeling and a popular opinion about what you think shouldn't be done based on the traditions of your national heritage or your political affiliations, and this, at the end of the day, if you're a Christian, and that's the only people who I think I can really, really address in this particular moment. If you're a Christian, like, you are not of this world, you're not of this kingdom, like, you're of the kingdom of Christ and heavenly kingdom, and so your affiliation shouldn't necessarily be with your race or your national origin or whatever. Like, there's too much more at stake. You know, you wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against kingdoms and powers and principalities and rulers of darkness in high places. Those sort of things are not, it's not worth your time to be worried about what the popular friggin' opinion is of your culture. Like, it just is not helpful or beneficial. And so, do I think that we need to do better about how we treat people? Absolutely, yes. Do I think that that is possible without people looking at their own hearts and saying, how do I have biases? How do I need to change? No, I don't think that that's possible. But we also can't change people's hearts. So all I think that we can do is provide information and let you make the decision on your own. You know, even in the Garden of Eden, like, God gave a direction and gave the information, you know, if you eat from this tree, you're surely going to die. And then he let them make that decision on their own, you know, and lo and behold, the information was accurate, you know. And so I think at the end of the day, like, all you can do is provide information. Hopefully that'll allow somebody to take a different perspective. And I think we need to be more open to the idea of, as like I had referenced, Pastor Miles McPherson had said it beautifully in his interview with Anderson Cooper. Is like, what if I'm wrong? You know, actually, I think it was Anderson Cooper who said that. I was like, what about the possibility that I might be wrong? How can I look at this from another angle, another perspective, and see a situation where I might not be right? You know, and so, I don't know, I'm kind of in a mood today, if you can't tell, but I think that, you know, it's, I think there's a lot wrong with how we as a human society have been operating. And unfortunately, if we continue down this path, it ain't gonna last for very long. And I mean, as we're well aware, the Bible is clear that this whole thing called the world and earth and stuff like that, it does come to an end at some point. And so, you know, unfortunately, I think if we don't get our act together, all we're doing is pushing further and further closer towards that end. And if so, Maranatha, then. But I think at the end of the day, like, it's just, we gotta be about something that's a little bit more substantial than just what's popular opinion. And we have to be above the idea of only taking sides with our culture or our nation or our politics or whatever, because at the end of the day, we can all learn something. And you know, how pitiful is it if we get to the point where we feel that we've learned so much that we have nothing more that we could possibly learn? Like, that's pretty pitiful and very ignorant, because we all stand to learn something. So that is my rant for the day, and not the happiest of videos, but hopefully helpful, hopefully informative. Like I said, feel free to like, share, repost, subscribe, whatever you want. Like I said, I'm not in this to be, you know, trending on YouTube. Like, I'm just trying to inform the people within my sphere of a different perspective that may help them look at things in another way. But yeah, in the comments, please be sure that if you write something in the comments, let's get a discussion going. Let's make it productive. I like happy faces, I like hearts, I like smiley faces, but I can make those all day myself. Let's get this discussion going. Love y'all. Y'all have a great rest of your evening, and let's do something good.